6 p.m. on Wednesday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the headliners. South Korea unleashed its strongest display of anger and disappointment yet over North Korea's latest provocations. Seoul will suspend all operations at the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean economic cooperation, the Kaesong Industrial Complex. South Korean lawmakers passed a resolution denouncing North Korea's recent missile launch. The resolution urges Pyongyang to halt future provocations and calls on the South Korean government to strengthen its military readiness while trying to resolve the issue through dialogue. On this, the last day of the long Lunar New Year holiday, highways in South Korea are clogged with people returning home after visiting their relatives. We start with a strong reaction from South Korea. Taking a page from Pyongyang's playbook, South Korea has decided to suspend all operations at the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex in response to North Korea's continued provocations. It's the strongest measure Seoul has taken regarding the complex, which is the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean economic cooperation, and much more to some. For details, let's connect to our Unification Ministry correspondent, Connie Kim. Connie, this is an extreme step. I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision.
Right, Daniel. Well, South Korea says that this special measure is a means to pressure North Korea to give up all of its nuclear weapons program. Just about an hour ago, Seoul's Unification Ministry said that it'll pull out all of its workers and suspend all operations from the Kaesong Industrial Complex.
A catastrophic situation will unfold if there is no change in the current situation with the advancement of North Korea's missile capabilities. If we leave Pyongyang to continue with its missile development, it will bring instability in the Northeast Asian region. This measure was inevitable to promote peace.
The ministry added the industrial park's operations must not contribute to the development of weapons of mass destruction at a time when the international community is tightening the sanctions on Pyongyang. The United Nations Security Council is drafting a resolution on North Korea for its nuclear test last month. Pyongyang reportedly earns about $100 million annually for the operations at the complex. Shortly before Seoul made the announcement, it notified Pyongyang of its plans. 1,084 South Koreans were set to enter the industrial park tomorrow morning, but they have been told to stay home.
Well, Connie, it's unfortunate that for South Korea it's looked to as a symbol of peace and unification, but for North Korea it's merely a cash cow to some of the leadership classes up there. Now, what about the South Koreans who are affected by this change? Does the government have plans to support the South Korean companies that were operating in that complex?
Well, Daniel, details of that support need to be ironed out. But back in 2013, when North Korea pulled out all of its workers from the complex, Seoul provided loans and special funds to the South Korean companies and made them tax exempt. One ministry official also said they're reviewing the possibility of offering the 124 companies some kind of replacement sites as an alternative to their operations in the complex. The South Korean companies operating in the industrial park reported losses of roughly 1 trillion Korean won, or roughly $834 million from the shutdown in 2013. But for now, we're not expecting that landmark symbol to restart operations anytime soon. As South Korea said, the North will have to address the international community's concerns regarding its nuclear and missile development and create an environment for normal operations at the park. I'm Connie Kim reporting live from Seoul's Unification Ministry.
Well, thank you so much for being out there for us, Connie. Now, the Kaesong Industrial Complex is more than just a symbol for both sides. It's got a long history. Looking back, it was launched in 2003, opened in 2004, largely financed by South Korea to increase cooperation between the two Koreas. The joint park currently hosts more than 120 South Korean companies, which employ some 54,000 North Korean workers. The estate is a precious source of cash for the isolated and impoverished North. The business park, virtually the only form of economic cooperation or link between the two Koreas, has become increasingly vulnerable to turbulent swings in inter-Korean politics. In 2013, during a period of heightened cross-border tensions, Pyongyang effectively shut down the zone for 5 months by withdrawing its workers. 2.5 years since the resumption, Kaesong Industrial Complex stands at a point of complete shutdown, putting an end to 13 years of operation. Well, unlike their usual day in the office, South Korean lawmakers at the National Assembly were united on a resolution to condemn North Korea for its recent missile launch. Kim Ji-yeon tells us more about the work done at the National Assembly on the last day of the 5-day Lunar New Year holiday.
South Korea's National Assembly passed a resolution on Wednesday denouncing North Korea's recent missile launch. An overwhelming majority of lawmakers, 243 out of 292, voted in favor of the resolution while 5 abstained. The remaining 44 were absent when the vote was called. The resolution urges Pyongyang to stop its weapons development and provocations and become a responsible member of the international community. It also calls on the South Korean government to strengthen its military readiness in close cooperation with the United States and work toward resolving the North Korean issue through dialogue with Pyongyang. National Assembly Speaker Chung Ih-hwa said North Korea's recent missile launch and fourth nuclear test are clear violations of United Nations Security Council resolutions, and that is why the National Assembly is condemning Pyongyang's provocative acts, which are threatening the peace and security of the Korean Peninsula and the international community. The resolution also states the recent launch will only further isolate North Korea from the international community and warns Pyongyang that it will pay a price for the ensuing damage. This is the second resolution passed this year, after one unanimously passed earlier this week condemning Pyongyang's fourth nuclear test last month. Aside from that, there are 2 other North Korea-related bills in the Assembly concerning counterterrorism measures and human rights that are awaiting lawmakers' consideration. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
A terminating resolution is what's needed at this point to put an end to North Korea's threats toward the international community. That's what South Korea's Foreign Minister Yun ByungSe said during a meeting with United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the UN headquarters in New York on Tuesday. Yun asked for Ban's support in bringing about a swift adoption of effective sanctions on Pyongyang, emphasizing that the regime has conducted 4 nuclear tests and 6 long-range missile launches in the past 10 years, despite 4 UN Security Council resolutions sanctioning the regime. Yoon is on a 2-day trip to New York to seek cooperation in punishing North Korea for its recent back-to-back provocations. He is expected to hold further talks on the subject with key UN members. North Korea's recent missile launch seems to have made up South Korea's mind over the deployment of a U.S. missile defense system known as Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD. Officials from the 2 allies will meet soon to hash out the details. Our Hwang Jun-ho reports.
A South Korea-U.S. joint working group will hold their first meeting this month to discuss deploying a THAAD battery to the Korean peninsula in the coming weeks. Negotiations were fast-tracked following North Korea's missile launch last weekend. Seoul's defense ministry says Jang Kyung-soo, Director General of the ministry's Policy Planning Bureau, and the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command's Assistant Chief of Staff for Strategy, Plans and Policy, Robert Hedlund, will lead the delegations. The main agenda is the rapid deployment of the ballistic missile defense system. There are 4 candidate locations: Pyeongtaek, Wonju, Gunsan, and Daegu. Pyeongtaek in Gyeonggi-do Province is one of the leading candidates, given that the U.S. military's 2nd Infantry Division will relocate to the region by the end of this year, and the battery could be used to defend the densely populated Seoul and Gyeonggi metropolitan areas. Another issue is the placement cost, which will be determined under the Status of Forces Agreement governing the status of American troops deployed in South Korea. One THAAD battery is expected to cost around $830 million. Once deployment is decided, Seoul will cover site and facility costs, while the U.S. will assume deployment, operation, and maintenance costs. Washington plans to operate 7 THAAD batteries across the world, including 4 on the mainland United States, by 2019. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
The top intelligence official in the United States has warned that North Korea could have access to weapons-grade plutonium within a matter of weeks. He also said the regime is close to fielding a road-mobile intercontinental ballistic missile. Kwon So-wai shares with us James Clapper's intel.
North Korea's weapons technology is advancing at a seemingly significant rate. Speaking to lawmakers Tuesday, U.S. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper said North Korea's 5-megawatt reactor at its main Yong-gil nuclear complex has been in operation long enough that the regime could start recovering plutonium from the reactor's spent fuel within a matter of weeks to months. Experts believe when the reactor is fully operational, it could produce enough weapons-grade plutonium to make one bomb a year. While North Korea had previously pledged to shut the facility down, it vowed in 2013 to restart it. Clapper also said Pyongyang has taken initial steps toward fielding a road-mobile intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching Alaska, as it's thought to have a minimum range of 5,500 kilometers, although he added the system has not yet been flight tested. Defense Intelligence Agency Chief Vincent Stewart underscored the threat posed by Pyongyang's evolving nuke and missile programs.
The DPRK display of a new or modified road-mobile ICBM during their recent parade and its 2015 test of a new submarine-launched ballistic missile capability further highlight Pyongyang's commitment to diversifying its missile force and nuclear delivery options.
Nevertheless, many experts agree the regime has a long way to go before it has a fully operational ICBM. U.S. weapons expert John Schilling, through an editorial published on North Korea monitoring website 38 North, said Pyongyang doesn't have an engine powerful enough to lift an ICBM, and it has yet to demonstrate the ability to build a re-entry vehicle that could survive at even half the speed an ICBM would require. And even if it were to overcome those challenges, Schilling says the size of an ICBM would make it easy to spot days before a launch, saying, quote, that doesn't make for a useful weapon. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
The chief of North Korea's military, Yong-gil, was executed earlier this month. That's according to a South Korean government official who said on Wednesday that the 61-year-old chief of the General Staff of Joseon People's Army had been found guilty of corruption and the pursuit of personal gains. Lee was appointed to the post in 2013 under leader Kim Jong-un. Lee was last seen in January during Kim's visit to the North's Ministry of the Armed Forces. The execution is thought to have happened sometime around a joint committee meeting on February 2nd or 3rd. This is the latest in a series of executions of high-level officials by Kim during his time in power. On the economic front, the country's financial officials came together to evaluate the potential risks North Korea's latest long-range missile launch could have on the local economy. Kim Min-ji gives us a summary of their conclusions.
The country's central bank convened another meeting on Wednesday to assess the impact of North Korea's recent missile launch on the South Korean economy. Based on what's happened in the past and given South Korea's sound economic fundamentals, the general consensus is that the North's latest provocation will have a limited impact on the local economy and financial market. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said that the central bank will stay alert as North Korea could become a risk factor for the financial market at any time. With regard to the recent downturn in major stock markets around the world, including Japan, the top central banker attributed the decline to global uncertainties, saying it's not because of Pyongyang. Lee did say, however, that the global economy will continue to face challenges down the road. This as Japan has pushed its interest rate down to the negative territory, and on top of that, there are also lingering uncertainties in China, falling global oil prices, and the slowdown in the global economy. The nation's finance ministry was also on the same page, saying no major trends have been detected since the launch. It's operating a 24-hour monitoring system and says it will take swift action to protect the local economy if there is a threat posed by new sanctions from the international community or further provocations by North Korea. Meanwhile, stock and foreign exchange markets in South Korea and other Asian regions that have been closed for the Lunar New Year holiday will reopen on Thursday. China will remain closed this week, while Japan, which has stayed open, will close for the day on Thursday. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
It's the final day of the Lunar New Year holiday here in Korea. As expected, those who made sure to spend some time with their relatives living outside of the capital are rushing back. picking the Seoul-bound expressways. As of 6 p.m., here's a list of how long the journey back to Seoul by car will take. According to the Korea Expressway Corporation, from Busan expect a road trip lasting close to 4.5 hours, 3 hours for those casting off from Gwangju. Drivers from Gangneung, you will be on the road for 2 hours and 2.5 hours, an hour and 50 minutes drive for those Seoul-bound from Daejeon. The KC forecast traffic should return to normal at around 8 p.m. the latest. For later updates on estimated drive times, log on to the Korea Expressway Corporation's official website. Turning to the latest in the U.S. presidential race, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have won resounding victories in the New Hampshire primaries. Trump secured more than 1/3 of the vote on the Republican side. This is the first time the billionaire property mogul has converted his popularity in opinion polls to votes after losing the Iowa caucus to Ted Cruz earlier this month. For the Democrats, Sanders secured 60% of the vote to Hillary Clinton's 38%. Clinton is still considered the frontrunner for the nomination, but the margin of loss will be a big blow of confidence to her campaign. The contest will now move on to Nevada and South Carolina. Japanese stocks dove again today after taking a tumble on Tuesday. The Nikkei shed 2.3% on Wednesday, extending the losses for a second straight day. The index fell over 5% the day before, the biggest single-day drop since May of 2013. The plunge comes amid growing concerns over the health of the global economy. On top of that, Japanese bank shares have been in for a hit since the country's central bank adopted negative interest rates last month. The strengthening yen has also played a part, due in part to investors selling off risky assets in search of safe havens. And that concludes our newscast for this hour. As always, thank you for watching.